The pain didn't go away. Morning came and Taehyung has to leave. They wished him a safe flight and time went on like usual with just the three of them. Jungkook slept through the whole morning, only waking up when he has to eat or pee. When lunchtime came, he tried to stay awake to accompany his children. They were watching Sophia the First, Era's favorite movie, in his room, and they were in their third episode when Jungkook's eyes turned to watch his children instead. Era was so focused on the television with a little smile on her lips, while Junghyun was so close to falling asleep. Jungkook knew them. A big part of his heart knew these two, even though his mind screamed, "Who? Who are these people?" They looked so familiar, but their names were nowhere to be found. It was like he knew them their whole lives, but he forgot. How could he forget? Then he remembered. He remembered how happy he was the first time he learned that he was pregnant. He remembered how scared he was when Taehyung found out. How he begged for the baby's life. How much he cried and hoped for the baby to have a complete and happy family, and his baby got that. Era got a happy family. And then another baby came and they were on cloud 9. They were happy. Jungkook was satisfied with the life he has gotten, and despite his illness, he was still grateful that this was how his life turned out to be. "Everything alright, Appa?" he heard Junghyun ask, and that was when Air turned to check on him too, confusion mixed with worry written on her face. He smiled at them, his eyes welling up with tears that he couldn't stop from constantly falling. "I'm just thankful," he replied in his shaky voice. For what? Era's voice was soft when she asked. It was like music to his ears, so he closed his eyes. "For being your Appa," he trailed off. His trembling lips curved upwards as his eyes watered even though it was closed. "For being Taehyung's husband." He heaved a heavy breath, but a sob cut it off. "For this life, I'm so thankful." By the time his children carefully pulled him into their embraces, he was already a crying mess. Please take care of each other when I'm gone. Take care of your dad." His children's silent cries entered his ears, but that didn't stop him from speaking. "Always make him his coffee every morning. I already taught you how he wants it." He felt them nod. "Don't leave him alone, please." It was just so unfair, for his two children and especially for his husband. He promised himself he wouldn't leave Taehyung, and then here he was, leaving him slowly. "We won't, Appa. Don't worry, we won't." Jungkook gulped a sob before nodding continuously. Thank you. Their talk ended shortly after that, but not before they were all drowned out by limitless "I love you." Jungkook was out again like a leaf, as if all his energy was drained after that small talk. When he awoke, it was already night. However, unlike all those other nights, it wasn't quiet. The house was full on crying. He heard people sobbing loudly, so loud they sounded like they were mourning, and it bothered him. What's wrong? What's happening? Who was crying? The door to his room opened within a second and someone burst in, crying, "Appa!" It was exactly 5:44 p.m. when the house's telephone rang. Nobody saw it coming. They were just about to wake Jungkook up because his friends were in the house to pay him a short visit, but then it happened. Just a few minutes ago, Taehyung called them saying that he was back in the country, but now, why was someone they never heard of telling them that their father was in the hospital? Why were they telling them that he has been caught in a car accident? Why were they telling them that he was in critical condition? Junghyun was the first one to enter their Appa's room. Seeing him awake surprised him, but he had no time for that. "Pa," he called, panic laced in his voice. "Dad got into accident. We need to go to him." Junghyun's words were fast and clumsy. Voices seemed distant, his ears were throbbing, and tears blurred his eyes. Era's cries were heard from outside, but that as well seemed distant. Then Jungkook looked at him questioningly. No. No, this can't be happening right now. Everything just crumpled down. Junghan breathed in through his nose and tried to calm himself before looking back into his Appa's eyes. Appa, Dad is in the hospital right now. Please. His tears fell, his lips trembled, and his heart broke, all because this was happening right now. Who are you and what are you talking about? Because Jungkook couldn't remember them again. They dashed right into the emergency room, shouting their father's name in mixed panic, worry, and pain, but he wasn't there. A nurse asked them who they were looking for and was told that their father was currently in the operating room. The injuries he got from the accident were pretty serious and he was bleeding a lot. They were thankful to Jungkook's friends for volunteering to watch over him so they could go to their father and worry about him first. It hurt them so badly to leave their Appa who forgot about them and to wait helplessly for their father. It was too much. Their Appa was dying already and then this happened. One thing was already too heavy, but then fate just had to add another problem. Were they being tested? Were they bad for these things to happen to them? They weren't, were they? They prayed the whole time. It seemed like hours passed when it has only been 10 minutes since they arrived. They wanted to know what was happening, and how their father was doing, so they could breathe properly again. But then the doctors inside the room panicked. It was like a movie. The movements inside the operating room felt like slow motion. They watched as their father's monitor beeped loudly, as it undoubtedly showed a straight line. They watched as the doctors tried to revive him back to life, but they couldn't. They watched as their shoulders slumped down, falling weakly as their faces gloomed. And then one doctor looked at his wristwatch and said those horrible words with a voice so powerless, so defeated. Time of death. Jungkook lay in his bed motionless. His breathing was slow and ragged while he stared at the boring ceiling. Era called his friends a while ago, dropping the news to them, and he was destroyed on the inside. The tears in his eyes didn't stop falling, but he wasn't making any sound. He wasn't bawling, wasn't sobbing, but he could feel his heart breaking fully. His whole body ached. He felt limp and all he wanted was to succumb to the darkness in his room. He wanted his bed to eat him up and never spit him out to this world again. He wasn't ready for this to happen. In fact, he was still preparing himself to leave his loved ones behind, not to be left behind. He couldn't even understand why. Why was Taehyung taken first? Why did he die first when Jungkook was the one with this goddamn illness? Why did the stars take Taehyung first? To make Jungkook feel this undying pain in his heart? To break him again? To leave him in pieces for the last time? Why was life being mean to him anyway? He hadn't done anything wrong to be punished like this. All his life, all he did was good things. He didn't commit deadly sins. He was good enough to at least lead a healthy, happy, and satisfying life. All he wanted was to die of old age with his husband. That alone was enough for him, leaving all problems behind him as if they never happened because he was thankful to be with Taehyung. But of course, the universe had to ruin it for him. It wasn't always rainbows, butterflies, and flowers. Not always unicorns and sunny days. Life wasn't about that, and he learned that the hard way. Because he didn't have a healthy, happy, and satisfying life. In life, there were bumpy roads. There were dark and cold nights. Even flowers had thorns. Life wasn't always beautiful. But at least, he had his family. Time was so short for them, but he loved every single moment he spent with them. He had beautiful children and a loving husband. His life wasn't perfect, but it was great. It was great. But positive thoughts weren't welcome when negativity surrounded the mind. And for a split moment, he forgot that he didn't have to wait longer to reunite with his husband again. He forgot about the pain that his children would be feeling when they lost him too. Jungkook forgot that he was literally dying, all because he felt like when Taehyung died, he took his heart with him. Taehyung took his life with him. He died with Taehyung, and maybe that was why when Jungkook closed his eyes, he wished that he wouldn't have to open them again and live another day of pain in this cruel, cruel world. Oh, how selfish of him. Era and Junghan spent their night bawling their eyes out on the hospital. They still couldn't believe what happened. They still weren't in their right mindsets when they came home the morning after that. It was almost 6 in the morning when they arrived home. As they expected, the house was silent. It was as if no soul lived there. But they knew there was one. They weren't ready to face him though. They weren't ready to fake a smile in front of their appa or try to make everything lighter because everything was just so damn heavy. They needed him the most right now. They need their appa to tell them that everything was going to be okay despite all that was happening. They needed him to tell them that this pain that they were feeling wasn't permanent. They needed to see his smile that assured them all the time. His smile that lifted the pain away. But he couldn't. He couldn't do that anymore. When they opened the door of the house, hugs greeted them. They were thankful that their own families were there to welcome them. It would have been harder if they weren't. They cried in their partner's arms. They didn't stop crying anyway since they left the hospital. But when the clock struck 6, they knew they should keep their breaths even. They should stop crying and wipe the wet tears on their faces because they have to face them. Seeing them cry wasn't going to do him any good, so they should stop. He only needed his medicine anyway, and after taking that, he would go back to sleep and they could continue crying again. Junghan knocked on the door carefully before entering. Era followed behind him, holding a tray that consisted of medicine and a glass of water in her hands. They walked straight to the man laying limply on the bed. Era put the tray on the bedside table before waking Jungkook up by gently shaking his body. They repeated this for a few seconds, but they didn't receive any response, not even an annoyed hum. Appa Jungkook stayed unmoving. Their breaths hitched when they saw his chest. It wasn't moving up and down like how it was supposed to. He wasn't breathing. Appa, they shook him harder, desperate to wake him up, but his head just dropped sideways. They checked his pulse and the air that came out of his nose, but there weren't any. And that was when their tears started falling again. Their Appa was dead. He died in his sleep and he left them. He finally left them. He finally left the world that taught him how to love deeply but, at the same time, break severely. He died in his sleep, and they wished it was during a very good dream. They wanted him to leave happily. He deserved it. After all of his suffering, he deserved that much. He deserved the end of all pain, and now that both of their parents were finally going to be together forever, without struggles and loneliness, they knew it was their turn. Their turn to wait for their time to finally be with them again and cherish the time that they have left. It was beautiful. The night was silent and there were no stars in the sky, but it was beautiful. The moon was big and the ocean was calm, and it was so beautiful. But that was not just the reason. So why was Jungkook so joyful because of that? Oh, right. Because of the man beside him. Jungkook turned his head beside him and stared shamelessly at the man he happily called his husband. There was a soft smile on his lips and he knew his eyes also showed how blissful he was feeling right now, but he didn't bother hiding that even when the older turned to look back at him with the same soft smile. They stayed like that for a few seconds, just staring into each other's eyes as if time stopped, and it actually felt like it did. It always felt like it did every time they looked into each other's eyes. The way their eyes would twinkle and hold the brightness of the stars in the sky. The way their eyes spoke with only love as their topic. The way their eyes locked each other's souls in them. It was so beautiful. "I'm not scared anymore," Taehyung said in a hushed tone. Jungkook's smile widened and he nodded his head because he, too, wasn't afraid anymore. He wasn't afraid of falling hard for this man anymore because he already did, and instead of letting him fall and break alone, Taehyung held on to his hands. Taehyung didn't let go even when he himself started falling as well. They didn't break when they landed, because they didn't stop falling. There was no end to the fall. It just kept on going and they weren't even complaining. After all, falling with someone was even better than falling for someone. It was the best feeling in the world. "This happiness doesn't scare me anymore," Taehyung continued as he raised his hand that was wrapped around Jungkook's waist to caress his cheek. Without much thinking, the younger's hand moved on its own to caress the man's cheek as well, and he smiled when Taehyung leaned into his touch. Jungkook examined every spot on the older's face, every perfection and imperfection, every softness and scar. He studied the older's eyes, the eyes that he loved the most, the eyes that stared at his lips patiently. And then he moved closer, leaning his forehead against the older's. "Kiss me," Jungkook whispered, voice soothing when asking, but for the older, it wasn't a question. It wasn't a command as well. For Taehyung, it was an answer. Taehyung's soft smile widened. Actually, he trailed off and Jungkook already knew where this was going, so he grinned. "That's what I'm planning to do all along," and then that was it. Their lips entangled and moved against each other. It was slow and passionate, like they were conversing their love to each other through it. Broken and destroyed flowers bloomed again inside their chests, and they knew that this time, those beautiful flowers were going to stay. All the scars that each painful memory left in their hearts healed. Those scars were still there, they know, but completely cured. They would never bleed again. At this point, they didn't even need to exchange "I love yous" anymore because they were already certain of each other's feelings. They were happy. This was a real paradise. No more pain. No more illnesses. No more accidents. The only thing that was present here was love. This was their special place. The place that was only meant for them. This time, Jungkook was sure that happiness will last here with his man, because Jungkook is happy with Taehyung. That will stay.